I'm Rob Lucuria. You're at Award 7. I'm so excited today to be talking to Anthony Willis, composer for Wuthering Heights. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you, Robert, so much for having me.
After I saw the film and then listened to the score, the first question that came to mind for me was about yearning as a musical state and how yearning is like tension or desire without release. And when you were writing the themes for the film, what were your instincts around expressing this palpable yearning musically? Is it about harmony, orchestration, restraint, or something more instinctive?
Good question. Very, very musical question too. So, Emerald really loved the idea, which she always takes me by surprise with the angle she wants to take the music in. And there was obviously a way to play this that was very gothic, very, thunder and lightning. And there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that more kind of scratchy and guttural, guttural sounds, especially with Wuthering Heights. But when it came to the relationship between Kathy and Heathcliff, and we wanted to explore this, like this line right in this void of, tender and tender and stark. So it's like you're just living in this very fragile space, and of hope and despair, of light and dark, I guess. So especially when it came to, first of all, the instruments we used for a lot of it were quite intimate and fragile, and at any moment you could hear somebody running out of bow, or and especially with the way that I built the main theme for Kathy and Heathcliff, it has this optimism in the harmony, but then it always just comes back to this kind of minor chord, and it's always coming down. So
Yeah.
you get that a lot, and a lot of leans in it. Like the yearning really came from the B section of the theme. The front of the theme is quite hopeful, and then it gets into this bit that was particularly what Emerald really liked about it. Was it's got these leans, and it leans, and you're like, is it going to go up? And then it just settles back down, and it keeps doing it. And so it's sort of like, I guess narratively you could translate that into being stuck in time, or getting another chance and then it not happening. And so that, I think that was the emotional hook for us, was that there's a particular chord progression, and I love moving the bass as well. So the chord progression, the bass changes the third time to like a first inversion chord, which is always like just kind of pulls your heart a little bit more. And there's a bit towards there's a theme that you first get when they're children, and then that same piece almost exactly comes back when Heathcliff is writing these letters to Kathy,
Mm.
and the letters are not, she's not getting them. And so it's the saddest scene, and there's this moment where she has a flashback, it comes full circle to them as children, and this moment where she's imagining Heathcliff as a kid with his hand on her ankle, and that bit, there's a particular repeat, the way it repeats, and it's sort of, I think it's, in that case, it's sort of unexpected because it deviates from the first time you hear it, the way it repeats, and it gets a little bit bigger and grander. So yeah, that was yearning, yearning through leaning, repetition, um, settling onto minor chords when maybe you'd hope for a more positive resolve, riding that line between hope and despair.
Yeah, that minor chord thing is what always gets me. This score is quite cohesive, but there are very distinct themes. For example, the harsh, wild Wuthering Heights and the luxurious, civilized Thrushcross Grange have distinct musical identities. Did you think about those two musical identities from the outset, and what defines each one sonically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Wuthering Heights is really, for Kathy and Heathcliff, is all about this sort of tyranny of Earnshaw, who's Kathy's father, and he's got this increasingly, I was going to say sensitive, he's volatile,
Yeah,
an unhinged state of mind. So, at first he's making a joke, and then he gets you, and that becomes a trigger for Kathy, and of course ultimately informs why she feels the need to escape to, well, she finds escape and a degree of solace in going to Thrushcross, and this idea of marrying Edgar, and why it's a good idea. So or why it feels like what she should do at the time. So yeah, it was, guttural cellos, and we actually took, speaking of yearning, I took the B section of the yearning theme, and I did it slow and twisted and moved it around the string section. So the first phrase is in the violins, and the second phrase is in the violas, and then it kind of moves around, so it's fractured and disparate and slow and kind of creepy and twisted. And I used a lot of bowed guitar that sort of snaps, that was really fun. And a lot of sulpant texture to it too, which I it's such an interesting color, because it also has this kind of appealing sound. And I think that's the thing about Earnshaw. Well, at one moment he's kind of like, yeah, no, I'm the coolest dad ever. I'm the kindest man alive, as he says, and as one of the his opening track is called on the score album. So that was Wuthering, and of course it's all in many cases it's underpinned by this kind of nightmarish feel of the hangman's drum that becomes a. Oh, I'm just going to pause for a second because I don't know if you can hear that.
Oh yeah.
Maybe it's being filtered out. There's a plane, yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh, there we go. It's gone.
It's like World War II. Yeah, go
on. So there's sort of, the movie starts with this hanging. So Emerald and I talked about this idea of this, I guess the stakes of adultery, the stakes of this world that Kathy's living in, and it's starting with a hanging, and so that's part of Earnshaw's and Wuthering Heights sound as well. This kind of foreboding drum that underpins a lot of those kind of cues. And then of course the relationship between drums and rhythm and lust and tension, and that we explore as well in the Wuthering Heights sound. And then Thrushcross needed to be kind of hollow. It needed to be intriguing and appealing, but sort of vacuous. And so I came up with this sort of waltzy feel, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It's sort of like, oh, this is interesting, but it doesn't kind of fulfill itself the way that Cathy and Heathcliff's yearning music does. So that was important to Emerald, that it was, it was one of the things. I actually went to visit her on set and watch Margot and Jacob work, and they were doing a lot of and Shazad and Alison, who were just so amazing in the film. And it was fascinating for me to see them work. And they were doing a lot of the stuff at Thrushcross when I visited. So I got a kind of early sense of that, which was really nice. And yeah, it was, sort of elegant, sort of faux classical, harps, dulcimer, music box, piano, giving the house a bit of this sort of slightly creepy historic feel, as if it's been there a long time. So yeah, that was very distinct from one another. And Emerald wanted that. She wanted them to each have their kind of own language. And of course, what's important is that although Cathy goes to Thrushcross, her problems, to escape her problems, they kind of all come with her. So you start, as the film carries on, you start hearing this dirtier, scratchier palette of Wuthering infiltrating, Thrushcross as well.
Yeah, that is the secret weapon of this score, because those themes do migrate as the film progresses for very good reason. And I love how Thrushcross it's beautiful, but it's also a bit of a trifle. It's a lovely confection, and it should be that way. It's exactly what I was hoping for. But you do actually employ some like wistful, fragile choral elements as well. What drew you to bringing human voice into that space, and what did it allow you to express that the orchestra alone couldn't?
I think, yeah, Emerald liked the idea of this sort of girlish voices, as if, I suppose it's like almost Cathy imagining, like my whole life I could have been growing up here, if my life had been different. So it's sort of this kind of girlish, slightly precocious sound but also, also represented kind of girlish lust, and especially when Alison Oliver's character Isabella is herself coming into her own. She's been stuck in this sort of this notion of the ward in an English novel is sort of, kind of a young lady who's sort of stuck in this purgatory because she doesn't really have independence or autonomy, and she through the course of the movie she starts to test that to the point that ultimately in Emerald's retelling, which I think was really interesting, is she becomes effectively the patriarch of Wuthering Heights because she becomes in charge. And so then we actually recall Earnshaw's music when she, grabs Heathcliff by the neck and is like, effectively it's like in Captain Phillips when he goes, "I'm the captain now." It's that moment of like, I'm in charge. So it's a really interesting journey for her character where she starts as this very kind of, she doesn't have any autonomy, and then she tests it. So the voices are also for her kind of coming, especially when they're together on the swing in Dog in a Manger and they start to butt heads big time over Heathcliff. That's when that's that kind of, she's coming out of her shell big time.
Yeah. Let's talk about Dog in the Manger, also Kitten and Clover, and the Wuthering Heights suite, because they feature this unreal, mesmerizing, thumping heartbeat element that just took my breath away, honestly. What does that rhythmic drive represent to you? And what were you deliberately trying to give the story? Like, were you trying to give it a pulse or something more primal and unstoppable?
Yeah, I mean, I think Emerald doesn't let me do a score without some kind of
You got it.
throb. But it does, absolutely. I think to her and to me, it represents lust. It represents this primal, timeless, and especially when you're making a film like this, and it's sort of worth drawing us into, what Charlie's music also brought, her songs brought to the film. This, lust and entertainment is timeless, and it starts really right at the beginning of the film with Charlie's amazing track House, and I then rearranged it and I put this kind of more ritualistic folk rhythm that's kind of, it's very what's the word for it? It's very it's intense. It creates this frenzy, and in a way, like that scene, that opening hanging scene, is like, it's a, if you were making the movie now, it would be a modern Charlie XCX rave. I mean, that's what it is. It's just their version of it then. So that hanging drum, that I sort of redid her drums to be a bit more idiomatic to the time, and with kind of more hangman drum percussion. And then that's sort of where it starts, this idea of pleasure in pain, I guess. And then through introducing Earnshaw and Wuthering Heights, and then Kathy has this moment in the stables where, I think that you first mentioned Kitten and Clover, which is when Kathy comes back from Thrushcross, and Heathcliff is on the roof, and Emerald was like that. I put that drum beat in there because she thought it was surprising. It's the cameras. The normal version of this scene is the carriage arrives, and Kathy gets out of the carriage and she looks wonderful. But in Emerald's version, she does this beautiful camera move with Heathcliff coming up the roof, and it zones in more on him and his burning lust that he's not able to express. He's had to, the dynamic that he's had with Kathy growing up is she's the alpha. He's sort of always has to follow suit. He has to talk about what she wants to talk about and never truly express himself, although of course he starts to push at that throughout the course of the film. So that was a fun little moment for him and his character of saying, this is how I feel about the situation in this moment. So yeah, I'm so glad you liked that moment. And we it was really fun to have that throb happening there. And then ultimately after that scene, Kathy finds herself in the stables and witnesses this moment that sort of just blows her mind, and it's this crazy scene where Heathcliff is also there and they can't make a sound, and So, for that, the drum groove, I really wanted it to have this. I wanted it to feel modern, but also organic. So it has this kind of. You could almost imagine somebody's like hitting something in the stables. It's like it's just tilting out of that world where it's fully, a period sound.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, because I was trying to pinpoint what it was that made it feel so visceral to me. And it's like it's not so polished and it's so unexpected as well. It happens like about 18 seconds into the. I'm thinking now about Kitten and Clover in particular. That's the track for me. I think that's my
Yeah.
highlight track. I love it.
Oh,
Yeah, and
really? Thank
I
you.
love that unpredictability that you put into this. And speaking of, let's circle back a little on the Wuthering Heights stuff, on the dark stuff, because Mrs. Heathcliff, The Kindest Man Alive, The Wuthering Heights Suite, the strings turn sharp and almost abrasive. The violins scrape, the groaning cellos, they feel heavy and unsettled. When you're creating that kind of instability, what are you actually changing and how the strings are played or recorded to get that texture?
So yeah, a lot of that is they're playing near the bridge. So you start to
Right.
get there's a couple of ways of getting, you know, often what's really interesting in film music is, notes. A pure note is putting all its cards on the table. It's saying this is the pitch that I'm playing, and you know, this is there's nothing ambiguous about it. And so obviously, what's really useful for film composers is when we can kind of blur that specificity a little bit and start
Yeah.
to imply other things. So there's a couple of ways on a string instrument you can do that. One is playing near the bridge, and you start to get these additional overtones. The other is playing harmonics, and harmonics are, you get that it's you get the substitution where rather than playing the fundamental note, you get these much higher notes, and those are really useful. And they do have this ambiguity because they can be used to be creepy, and they can also sound sad and ethereal. And so I think again back to where Emerald wanted to live with this, that will they, won't they? Is it ethereal or is it doomed? Living in that ambiguous space is really was really fun to do. And there's a lot of harmonics, especially in the final act of the film when Heathcliff is walking into her bedroom, and it's almost like an old church organ. The way that these harmonics feel, and you can hear that in the track "Be With Me Always."
Yeah.
Um, and it's a very intimate sound, and of course that track then blossoms into a very gothic, large. It's probably the loudest moment in the score. One of them, that under the famous lines, "Be with me always, take any form, drive me mad, only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you," which was just like such incredible dialogue from Emily Bronte. And I mean, Emerald just did such an amazing job at adapting the screenplay, so that she really,
Yeah.
I mean, the number of amazing lines. It's definitely the most dialogue heavy score I think I've done. Like, a lot of scenes with intimate dialogue and the cues working around them. So I was really lucky to get to react to these incredible lines. And I mean, you have not broken my heart. I have not broken your heart. You have broken it, and in breaking it, you have broken mine. Like these just incredibly
So
powerful,
good.
timeless lines.
Yeah.
So anyway, I digress, but yeah, no. So in terms of harmonics and sopran both create this ambiguous tones, and it did this kind of stuttering harmonics that were almost kind of like the wind, which I there's so much about the film and the score that maybe opens up new avenues for how people have experienced the book, but also I wanted to pay homage to kind of when you play the Wuthering Heights suite, you go, oh yeah, that's Wuthering Heights. It's this house up on a mountain with the wind rattling through it. So that's what those are at the beginning of the Wuthering Heights suite. This and again they're kind of pleasing and kind of creepy to listen to. So it's
Yeah.
fun to do.
I've always wondered what it is about Sul Ponticello that evokes this visceral feeling within me, and a score like this is a really good example of how just that variation in how a particular instrument is played can really make such an impact. But yeah, I digress as well. Let's talk a little bit more about Emerald Fennell because obviously, as a frequent collaborator um, over the years, I'm wondering how your working relationship with her has evolved over the years, and how whether you have some kind of shorthand with her now, and how that helps you both in creatively.
I mean, gosh, there's so much trust, I think, and I'm so honored to be trusted with the, you know, monumental task of coming, coming to films like this. It's interesting, this idea of shorthand, because I think always by the end of the score you kind of are like, yeah, we know what we're doing, and and then it's done, and then you finished it. And then the next one is always, it's always something different, and it's something new. So it's that new moment of discovery, and me learning. Emerald always surprises me with where she wants to go. I think what I can expect from her is she's always going to have great ideas, and I always never want to do the the dull, obvious thing. She's always going to want to try and find that thing that's a little bit more interesting. And this one was really nice in that this was the first one where I spent quite a lot of time in the edit with her and her fantastic editor Victoria Boydell, and we, I had a room actually in the cutting room, so she could kind of pop in and out, and we really, it was and a lot of things. I mean, that moment I was just describing, the famous "Be with me always" section where Heathcliff makes this proclamation. I think she was sitting next to me as I was kind of doing it. So whether it would have happened without her, saying yeah, go bigger, yes, up, and then I think she was like, she's very musical herself, so she makes suggestions. She goes, oh, what if it kind of did this? And then I go, yeah, and I'll raise you. What about this? And like, and she's like, yes, so that whether that stuff happens, composers work with directors in such different ways, where sometimes on the other side of the world and you're sending things, and I think a bit of that space is really good too, just to try and bring, you want to bring your filmmaker like the best you can, and you kind of have to lock yourself in a room sometimes just to think about that, but equally just having that immediacy and I guess that's what we have got over the three films, is this comfortability of, I will often write cues in front of her, and it's often feels at the time like a train wreck to me because it's sort of a mess and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. But she's such a gifted filmmaker, and that she can kind of see past that and right over the top of it and react to it and encourage or discourage, if it's not quite where she wants to go. And she also she sometimes wants to see things sort of over the top of where they should be, and you're kind of going, oh my gosh, this is going to work, and sometimes you do go slightly over the edge, and then you pull it back and you go, oh, that's actually way more interesting than if we'd just been a bit timid about it and just not gone there. So I mean, that moment at the end of the film, as an example, like it's suddenly very grand and gothic and kind of sneaks up on you from this very intimate music, but she goes there, and she has a very broad musical taste too, so she loves, in a way she loves everything to a fault, which is lovely, and she really, I mean, and not just in the score, and I've said this many times, but she really looks for opportunities for all of her departments to bring their best and to shine, and she really understands the inner workings of every department, and as any great director should, and she's just very inspiring, and that's her her sort of modus operandi is she walks into a room and she's excited about what's going to happen, and that's a really wonderful place to be.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine how rewarding that kind of environment is. She's done such a beautiful job on this film because for many of us who are so familiar with this, I did Wuthering Heights in high school, and my copy is so well thumbed, and I have notes in every margin. So it's a really important piece of literature for me. And walking out of that cinema, I was just completely gobsmacked at how immersed I felt. I didn't care about what I thought about the story. I just wanted to be part of Emerald's vision. And on that note, I wonder when you're both working out the energy and wrestling with whether the film's going to go too far on one side or another. Were there many conversations about overdriving the romance or underplaying the tragedy, and how do you calibrate that so that it turned out so beautifully?
Gosh, well, obviously, yeah, it's great to hear that you enjoyed it, and it is tricky because it had to be unrequited, but it had to be pleasing. It had to be,
Yeah.
I mean, the big moment for the romance, of course, in the book, it really is unfulfilled. You never allow them to see them kissing, or certainly anything else. And so there's that moment, "Kiss Me and Be Damned" on the score album, where Heathcliff walks away from her, and then he turns around and looks back, and it's this just stunning shot of Jacob Elordi looking sort of through the rain, through this tunnel of the Pike, which was the place that they kind of their sacred spot in a way. And he's coming back, and it's raining, and it's going to happen. And so that was a moment that Emerald she really wanted to drive that home. And so there were the moments to be restrained, and then there were the moments to kind of let loose a bit. So I think it's something that she really has such a good sense of, and she would sculpt that with me and say, no, this has to be. And I think I did several versions of that scene with different themes and different. I mean, early on when we spotted the film, I did a whole version of it with a different theme, and we kind of came. We came to, actually, I think we'd scored a scene later in the movie, and then she says, "Oh, let's try that here," and then it as a road map, and it had that kind of inevitability that I think she was looking for.
Yeah. Given your work over the years, your beginnings with John Powell, of course, and how you've evolved, I'm wondering how this film, in particular, has pushed you into new territory in your evolution as a composer. Can you pinpoint anything in particular?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, this film really allowed me to wear my heart on my sleeve, which is lovely, because I think, and be very honest. Actually, I think that was the thing that you might expect from Wuthering Heights score is, as I was saying at the beginning, like a really dark, thunder and lightning approach to it, but it's plaintive, and it's very honest, and it's very innocent, actually, like the way it starts as children. That's what I really wanted, was this really kind of this pathos, this sadness, and I think certainly it was similar to a degree with Saltburn, but this to even larger extent. Barring a few short pauses, there's a 14-minute stretch, I think, at the end of the film that's non-stop score, and it had to tell that story of this sadness, and that stepping back in a broader sense. I mean, it's certainly, you mentioned John, the amazing John Powell. Like he taught me that a lot, sort of the ability to look back in a more macro way at the shape of a cue, and it's so important because you get lost in this sometimes. Oh, well, if this works, then it's fine. I'll get this bit to work, and knowing what has the order that your decisions have to be made in, and say, well, there's no point getting fixated on how this shot's going to hit at this moment, because I need to establish this broader shape. In Kathy's death, that whole sequence was difficult to get right, but when I got it right, it was because I sat back and conceived the whole thing. I think I played pretty much the whole thing down as a sketch just to like figure out that big shape, because without it, there's no point committing to anything really, because it is all about that big long drive, and all the way up to the return as children. So
Yeah.
and the theme was really useful. It allowed me, it had this, even if I pulled back the actual melodic aspect of it, there was a journey with the chords that takes you, once I had the kind of the restraint, it's actually, what really was the trick there is that the chords move slower than you might expect, so that you're stuck on each chord slightly longer as he's riding, so there's rhythm in it, but there's also this sort of sad inevitability to it. So that was, I think, in terms of, for me, like remembering the importance of that macro. And you always need both. I mean, ultimately, like the devil is in the details, and getting chords voiced in the right way and getting them in the right register, in the right, the right key, so that they have the right tessitura, so they make you feel things in the right way, all matters too. But that macro shape, I think, was a really, it's really lovely to have that opportunity to see a film, to the bit of finish in that way.
Absolutely. Speaking to John Powell, I spoke to him not long ago about his beautiful work on Wicked for Good. And it's just reminded me that you've obviously learned from one of the masters back in your early days on how to mine emotion. And you're so good at that. And I remember when I spoke to you about Saltburn a couple of years ago, we had a similar conversation about how you're able to do that. To me, it feels like so effortlessly, but that kind of, I don't want to underplay the amount of work you put into it. So that leads me to my final question, because sometimes there's this debate about whether film music should be noticed at all, whether it should just disappear into the story. And I'm one of those people who say, no, film music is the most important thing, because I'm obsessed with film music, right? So what do you hope or want audiences to maybe rediscover about the score once they've enjoyed the film, if they do end up streaming it in their headphones? Is there more about this score that perhaps we can discover when listening to it ourselves?
Gosh, I mean, one of the things that's so wonderful about film music, and there's a devil's advocate side to this, which is that, well, films shouldn't have music in them at all, unless they exist in the scene and it's part of the scene. And actually, obviously, some of the most brilliant and best uses of film music is exactly that, where, thinking of, and it's easy to do with films that are very music focused, like Amadeus or something. It's some of the most genius uses of film music, or somebody listening to a song in a scene and how that then underscores something. But music, as it does exist in films, the wonderful thing about it is it does take on this incredible meaning for people that's bigger than the music could ever be on its own. And then, weirdly, most fortunately, if it's got that platform, people do get to know it and they have an emotional connection to it, it can also take on a whole other meaning too. People listen to it and they imagine. I remember one of my first scores, and a friend wrote to me, he was like, oh yeah, I can imagine this spaceship taking off. And I was like, well, that doesn't happen in this movie, but like, that's really flattering that it can. In fact, John said this to me, which is such a beautiful quote. Music is like clouds. You see shapes in it that you want to see sometimes, and it's the reason that music can be so malleable. It can be so, if it's got the right shape, it's got the right intention, it can be very universal. So of course, I hope that people. I mean, it is obviously designed to work with the film, and I hope that it brings people back to the film when they listen to it and gets to relive that emotional journey that they go on in the film. I mean, it's been lovely to hear from a lot of people just how they've really sobbed after the movie, and I think that's what Emerald really wanted to deliver, is this very sad, allow you to feel, allow that tactile relationship with a movie where you just let all your emotions out. So I hope first and foremost that people that are kind enough to listen to it again, they come back to the movie, and then live. And then that, like many film scores, that it gives them pleasure in their own day, in their own emotions, thinking their own lives through as well. So, it's a wonderful, it's a very fortunate thing to be a musician attached to film.
Absolutely, Nate. Well, once again, congratulations on this stunning score. I think it's your best work yet, and that's saying something. Thank you so much again for your time today, Anthony. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you.